If you don't think there's hope for the world, why bother going on?
What is going on, everybody? I hope you're having a good week, and I hope you enjoyed that Last of Us season finale, because I sure as heck did. So without further ado, this is my review of season 1 of The Last of Us. Now, The Last of Us's recent releases, to say the least, has got a lot going for this series of video game and shows. Even after The Last of Us 2 controversy. There are going to be some spoilers, by the way, but I'll try to hold back for those who haven't seen the show. From the show's first episode, it received almost nothing but praise, and I personally decided not to cover any episode specifically, mainly because I wanted to wait until the end to judge the show in its entirety. With the show and its specific themes, like fighting off a zombie while giving birth, can divide its viewers sometimes, to say the least. So depending how much of those themes were present could only be determined by watching the entire show, so I waited. And was the show everything I hoped it would be? And is it worth watching a season 2 knowing what's going to happen? Or should the show just get cancelled and just end at this ambiguous point? Well, I'm hopefully here to clear all that up. Right from episode 1, The Last of Us Season 1 is easily the best video game adaptation on screen, quite simply ever. The environments, characters, and monsters are done exceptionally well and accurate. The character that stands out the most to me was Tess. She was pretty much a one-for-one adaptation of the video game character. But what eventually happens with her character by the end of the show was done slightly different, but I think it was purposeful. Because of some specific themes in a video game like The Last of Us was kind of overused, while in the show, themes like violence weren't, which I can see why the fan of a video game wouldn't ease up to the show as easily as they did with the video game. But as for the infected and other monster variants in the show, they were done extremely well and with purpose. I would have personally liked to see more infected, but the bloater was the main highlight of the show for me, and its reveal is everything I wanted. So overall, I'm satisfied with the monster variety in this show and couldn't ask for more. Seeing how well they were represented put shows and movies like Resident Evil to absolute shame for the most part. I still love the zombies from Train to Busan though. That movie is an absolute masterpiece. But even with movies like that, The Last of Us and its infected hold up extremely well. The director should be proud. And if The Last of Us does anything right, it's translating what the video game message was to each episode. I can't say the same for the video game. From the beginning, starting the show with my girlfriend, honestly thought I would need to show her the video game afterwards. But by the end, I saw that certain tones were better represented in a show format. Don't get me wrong, I still like the game more, but during the game, like with every video game, because you have so much time to spend with the characters, the message of the overall story sometimes gets lost in transition. I think the main point of The Last of Us Part 2 was to never lose that message during the game, to consistently remind you what you're doing and who the villain is. With The Last of Us Part 1, sometimes, or most of the time, that line is blurred to the point most players did what they did at the end without even questioning it. That's either an incredible manipulation tactic or failed storytelling to make it clear who the bad guy was. The show, on the other hand, somehow shows us the stark differences in these moments. Most of the show was traveling and spending time with these characters, showing, as the series described, the light in those dark moments. While at the end of the show, it's extremely obvious what Joel is doing, and it's completely wrong. I didn't feel that way with the original game. Maybe it was because limitations, but I honestly didn't get the point that ultimately Joel becomes the heartless shooter taking orders from something he's scared to face, like with Fedra at the beginning of the show and game. And regarding episode 3, I get how some people would think Bill's character should have done more, or his relationship with Frank almost came out of nowhere to push an agenda. I think judging by some people's reactions, they both cancel each other out. I saw so many phobic comments for that episode, it was truly horrifying. That episode highlighted the light, while the reaction to some people highlighted the darkness. I think the most you could do is get that message of open-mindedness out there. And there will always be people with a chip on their shoulder to make excuses to not have those things portrayed. And boy, did we see a lot of excuses. I personally think open-mindedness is exactly as it's described. It comes from any direction or all directions, either video game or show. book, or Bible? Did the focus of the relationship need an entire episode? I think so. I think a relationship should get multiple episodes if it's justified enough. And the message of that show, to me, was justified. I loved their relationship. I didn't think they were just showing it to make us watch a gay romance. It felt more like they were showing us how judgment and fear could be put aside for happiness. That episode wasn't only an important mark for television, it was a message to the world. That you don't have to be scared of one side or another. You can just choose happiness no matter who, from the outside looking in, thinks your happiness should be a focus. That's a noble and dangerous message as seen in the show later on. Like Bill said, we protect what's important to us, and may God help whoever stands in our way. Well, that's pretty much the gist of what he said. Overall, I thought that was an amazing episode and it's easily Oscar-worthy. Whoever disagrees, ask yourself why you're disagreeing when the characters were that way since the original game. Nothing changed besides Bill actually being a good person and choosing the right path, which was happiness opposed to fear. But back to the main storyline. While watching the ending, compared to the rest of the show, my girlfriend and I were completely silent, witnessing the craziness that bursted out of Joel, doing whatever it took to save anything he saw as important. And that was an important theme in this show and continued to be an important theme, seeing how Fedra, the people, and even the cultists wanted to protect what was important to them no matter what, and doing things that were in the gray for those important things. And there are a lot of people mentioning that basically everyone in this show is bad, but there's always a question. What if they're just misunderstood like Joel? What if you can love them the same way that we love Joel because we're close enough to him? People in the show, even though they're doing insane things, call Joel insane. But obviously the point of the show was to get us on Joel's side. Looking at it from a neutral standpoint, everyone in this show has gone crazy in their own way, but some people are clinging to what they believe in. By the end, Joel makes it clear he just wanted to fight for what he believed was more important, but Ellie made it clear what was important to her from the beginning. So in a way, Joel is a nicer version of those cultist cannibals, but a lot more dangerous. And this show kind of made it clear how dangerous and one-track Joel actually is, despite all of the signs telling him that he shouldn't do something because of his snap judgment or twitch to go with what he believes in. He in turn changes a lot of lives. And the show did a wonderful job of showing the complexity of Joel, like the game never did. All of the PTSD that he had because of what happened, how he dealt with it, and how he continues to deal with it. Putting me on his side, like Ellie said, no matter where he goes, I'll follow. But it seemed by the end of the show, some places are not worth going, even with the ones you love. And by the end of the show, it puts the plot in an odd spot with light and darkness and makes you feel almost uncomfortable, not knowing which one is greater in the situation. By the end of the video game, I was just in that I just beat the game and saved the girl mode. So honestly, that message didn't sink in until what happened in The Last of Us Part 2 and seeing the consequences for my actions. The message that game had was so palpable that it was clear we weren't feeling the right things about what we did for a long time, just like Joel. So it's a difficult question if there should be a season 2. I'd assume most people want to see what happens in response to what Joel did, but it seems like a finished story by the end, with Joel making a huge sacrifice, and honestly by the end, what else could happen other than more bad, like Joel said, while trying to convince Ellie to just forget about the mission and go home. I think watching a season 2 for me would be incredibly difficult, especially since he's been played by the Mandalorian himself, Pedro Pascal. That would honestly kill me because I know at the end of the day, even though Joel is a monster, what he was seeking at the end and fighting for, to him was a righteous decision, and all he wanted was happiness. But all of his actions in the past, by The Last of Us Part 2, meet up with him, and seeing how someone in this world can only sacrifice and not create happiness, it's a tough pill to swallow. The realization of knowing that Joel has to pay for what he did isn't actually going to be easy to accept for most viewers, which at that point most people might just stop watching. So would a season 2 actually even be necessary if people just end up not watching the rest of the season? Honestly, after Abby takes over in the show, I think most people will react the same way, but without the cool gameplay to keep them engaged. The director would need to make Abby and Ellie extremely interesting and relatable to make the viewer forget the tragedy they just saw. So personally, I wouldn't watch a season 2, but I highly doubt this awesome show would get canceled. If I were in charge of HBO, would I cancel it? In all honesty, if I had that decision, I would think first. What important message does the second season have to put out into the world? This goes back to episode 3. To justify happiness against other convictions and disagreements, even though Abby is doing the right thing by avenging her hero scientist's father, does she also deserve happiness because we as viewers and players love the monster that killed him? The answer in my head had to be be a yes. Truly going into what makes us human, it's defending our happiness and looking away from our mistakes and hopefully learning from them. Now personally, I've gone through a lot in my life. Even in this past 2 years, it's been a lot. And we've all gone through a lot in these past few years. And even talking about it now is like a bit difficult, honestly. And all I can do and all we can do is look away from those mistakes and hopefully learn from it to earn our happiness. It's a broken down message over a lot of BS, but that's exactly what it is and should be if, as a show and video game, is trying to portray an accurate post-apocalyptic world with real people trying to revive it. Some people will try to revive it with religion, some with communities, some with force. But when, from the beginning, it all ended because of force, there's no choice but to fight fire with fire to eventually save the world with our community. But after the saving is done, the last thing these characters need is hope and faith. Ellie and Abby in Season 2 represented two characters that want to save the world with their hope and faith, but have no choice but to use force to get there. I think both characters are similar and capable and have extremely strong beliefs that happens to be on opposite sides. In any situation, that sounds like war. And Joel, with what he did, it's clear to see he started that war. His sacrifices, by the end, he realized needed to happen because he didn't want Ellie to die. That's pretty much all he wanted by the end, to protect her. If you think about Joel that way, sure, he could have killed Abby, but he chose to accept his fate and consequences. Like Ellie by the end of Part 2, instead of becoming an unredeemable monster, she stopped herself before starting another war and just accepted her consequences, which is almost impossible for anybody to do. Most people would want to drag others down with them to fight off those consequences, like with war. It seems a lot better to fight with those you love opposed to suffering alone, which is the only right way to prevent more people from suffering. And because of what happened in the first season, Ellie might have to pick both, and that's because of what Joel did. And it's obvious Season 2 will ultimately happen, but if it can portray what Neil Druckmann wanted to portray in a more appropriate light, because The Last of Us Part 2 was delayed, so the storytelling was a bit messy in that way. I feel people will like Season 2 a lot more than Part 2. But that's been my review. I highly enjoyed what The Last of Us ultimately gave its viewers. I think the show and its quality was a 9 out of 10 easily. It did everything the game did, only faster and more direct, and with constant representation of the message it wanted to portray. Sure, we didn't get some moments, but I'm surprised we got most of them, with moments involving Ellie and Joel being some of the strongest. And that's exactly how it was supposed to be. I can't recommend this show enough, and I try to give you some spoilers here and there without ruining the whole show. I believe that if I mentioned what would happen in the future, that you would be more interested to see the show and what transpires there. I think if you want to introduce someone to the world of The Last of Us, this is the perfect place to start. And I've seen the evolution of intrigue with the people I watch this show with over the course of each episode. And after watching the show, I believe that you can show them the game and they'll be equally as interested, even though there are a lot of cases of extreme violence in the game, but I'm sure they'll stay for the story. And let me know what you guys thought about The Last of Us series Season 1. Do you think the same thing, that Season 2 is still justified even though there's going to be a lot of divisive elements in it? And let me know what you thought generally about everything in the comments below. And thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you guys have a good one. Later.